Leave! Don't come back!
Please, open the door. It's pouring out here.
The night after the funeral, grief came home with me, but the house didn't let me in. My key jammed in the lock. My daughter-in-law stood in the doorway and said, "It was changed. Dad wanted things in order." What followed wasn't just betrayal. It was the unraveling of a secret my husband buried in ink and brass. A tiny key marked for later. This is the story of a widow locked out of her own life, and the will that turned revenge into redemption from funeral to front porch. Lilies clung to my dress like the memory of a touch, sweet and too strong. I drove home with silence in the car, my hands at 10 and 2, eyes fixed where the headlights met the night. The house at the end of the block sat still as a photograph, and for one breath I imagined it inhaling with me, the kind of shared rhythm you forget you had, until you notice it's gone. The key did not turn. Metal met metal and refused. I tried again, feeling the silly hope surge. Maybe I'd held it upside down. Maybe the teeth were bent. The porch light blinked on, cruelly bright. The door cracked open a hand's width. "It's late," she said. Her voice had the shape of politeness and none of its warmth. My key. I held it up as if it were a passport back into my life. "It was changed," she said evenly. "Dad wanted things in order." Dad, the word fell between us. The lock shone. Fresh brass, no scratches, no history. "I need to get inside." "Your things are packed," she said. "In the garage." A practiced calm colored her face, the sort of expression people wear when they've rehearsed their lines. The door closed with a quiet click, as if it were doing me a kindness by not slamming. I stood there with my key in the wrong story. The night pressed in. Somewhere in the dark, a lawn sprinkler kicked on, hissing against the cool. I could hear my husband's laugh in the shiver of leaves, brief and out of reach. I walked to the garage. A suitcase waited by the wall, the old fishing sticker peeling at the corner. I knelt and tugged the zipper until it freed with a snap. My sweater, the mended one. 2 pairs of shoes. A photo album I'd thought was buried in a box under the bed. The way she'd chosen these things felt like a pointed kindness. Enough to survive, not enough to belong. Across the street, a porch light glowed. Mr. Alvarez lifted a hand and came down the steps in his robe, careful on knees that had complained since his years at the factory. "You okay?" he asked. "I will be," I lied. He looked at the suitcase, then toward my house, then back at me. He had the kind of face that asked questions without asking them. "Come on," he said. "Couch is free. It never complains." Pride flared hot and sat beside shame. I wanted to ring the bell and demand the key back. I wanted to wait on the porch until a miracle grew legs. Instead, I gripped the suitcase handle and felt the burn of the cheap plastic against my palm. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. As we crossed the street, I turned. The front curtains shifted. A small glow lit a face. She had been waiting to watch me leave, the way a script waits for a cue. Inside the Alvarez living room, the air smelled like lemon cleaner and coffee. He fetched a blanket and set a glass of water on the table. "You're not alone," he said. He left the hallway light on. I folded into the couch, the way you fold into the truth when denial tires out. I pressed my hand against the keys in my pocket. They had weight, but not the power I'd counted on. The brass key. Morning edged the blinds in gray stripes. The house made soft noises, old wood speaking to itself. I sat up, hair matted, and opened the suitcase. A sweater, the photo of us at the county fair, his arm thrown around me, his hat too big for his head, my sewing kit with a loose lid. I pressed down to close it, and something slid beneath my finger. A tiny brass key wrapped in a scrap of notepaper. His handwriting. Neat, angled, patient, for later. I closed my eyes and saw it. The kitchen sink, summer tomatoes under the tap, the way water beaded on the backs of our hands. "You'll always be safe with me," he'd said, drying my fingers with a towel he hung over the oven handle. Not grand, not theatrical, everyday truth, tucked where it would be used. Not a house key, not a car key. The ridges were fine, the shaft short, a lock that never traveled far from the thing it guarded. Later. He'd chosen that word like a breadcrumb. He believed I would find it when I needed it, not before, which meant he'd known I would need it. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I scrolled through voicemails with the detached fatigue of grief triage. Hello, so sorry, call if you need anything. We loved him too. Until a calm voice with a familiar gravity cut through the fog. Hello, this is Daniel Price from Weston Whitman. Please bring your identification and the key we discussed. Tuesday, 10 a.m., Suite 802, Walker Building. The timestamp, 2 days before my husband died. I replayed it for what felt like an hour. Daniel knew about a key we had never discussed, which meant the key had been discussed without me. A steady feeling rose, not anger, not yet, but the sense of a floor returning to a room. Whatever plan my husband built did not depend on the goodwill of people who would change a lock before the lilies had wilted. Look where numbers sleep. I went back to the house, not to argue, but to collect the pieces of myself that travel poorly. The garage door stuck halfway, then gave with a metallic sigh. Boxes, coats, a baking dish I'd thought I lost. I pulled open a tote labeled kitchen, the way a person checks old letters and found something better than memory. An envelope tucked behind a flour tin with a chipped rim. My name on the front, ink smeared where his pen had paused. Inside, a single note on an index card that smelled like cinnamon and thyme. Look where numbers sleep. Ask for the box that isn't ours. Use the little key. Friday, 2 o'clock. At the bottom, he'd drawn a small square and written our bank's name. I stared at the words until the room steadied around them. He'd hidden the map where I would find it if the world turned wrong. Numbers sleep at the bank. A box that isn't ours, safe deposit. The little key sat on my palm like a pulse. That afternoon, I walked through the bank's revolving door on legs that did not yet trust me. The lobby smelled like old carpet and new coffee. The manager, Mrs. Raines, recognized me with the careful sympathy of someone who has practiced their condolences in a mirror. "We're so sorry for your loss, Mrs. Whitman," she said. "How can we help?" "I need access to a safe deposit box," I said, my voice thinner than it used to be. "Do you have the key?" I showed her the brass. She led me through a hallway where sound went soft. The vault opened with the heavy finality of a story that cannot be untold. Together we turned keys, hers and mine. The drawer slid free with a whisper. "I'll give you privacy," she said, and stepped outside. Inside, a stack of documents no thicker than my finger. On top, a sealed envelope with my initials. Beneath it, a codicil, signed, witnessed, dated 3 months before he died. A binder clip held a copy of our trust with a dot in the margin next to a paragraph about the house, as if to say, "Start here." I opened the envelope with my initials, his smaller handwriting, the one he used for lists he couldn't afford to get wrong. Read with Daniel. "Do not show anyone else first. If they corner you, call Mr. Price and wait. They, not names, not faces, a shape, the shape of pressure." I put everything back exactly as I found it, closed the drawer, and returned to a lobby that felt suddenly too bright. On the sidewalk, I tucked the envelope under my coat even though the sky was clear. Grief had stolen my appetite and hours of my sleep. It would not steal my plan. The law in plain words. Daniel Price had the voice of a man who had learned to say the right amount. In his conference room, glass wall, city view, he poured water into a glass and slid it toward me as if he were giving me permission to be thirsty. "First," he said, "I'm sorry for your loss." I nodded. The words didn't bounce off the way some did. He meant them. "I'm here because of a message and a key," I said, "and because I was locked out." He watched me without flinching. "Tell me everything in order." I did. Porch light, door, suitcase, Mr. Alvarez, the brass key wrapped in a note that said, "For later." The letter behind the flour tin, the box, the envelope with my initials, the codicil. He listened with a pen in his hand and never looked at his watch. When I finished, he opened a folder already waiting at his elbow. "Your husband was meticulous. 3 months ago, he executed a codicil to his will. 2 things matter most. 1, a life estate in the marital residence, which means you have the legal right to live in the house for the rest of your life. You are responsible for ordinary upkeep and utilities. The remainder men, the heirs who take after your passing, are responsible for major structural repairs and property tax. unless the will assigns it otherwise. 2. A conditional clause, what he called his kindness clause. He slid the codicil to me with the relevant paragraph flagged in yellow. I read it aloud, softly, as if the paper might spook. The clause required his heirs to keep me safely housed in the home for 90 days after his death. No pressure, no lockouts, no forced moves. It allowed those 90 days as a human buffer before anyone scrambled for control. If they fail, Daniel said, tone neutral, the will triggers an alternate plan. The property will pass, after your life estate ends, not to them but to a scholarship fund he named. Other assets follow a similar logic, toward a trust for the grandchildren rather than the people who breach. I stared at the sentence that changed the weight in my body. The door that had closed on me last night had opened months ago on paper. He hid it, I said, a mixture of awe and ache in my chest. Not from me. For me. He placed it where interference couldn't reach, Daniel agreed. Your husband understood pressure. He asked me to keep your appointment off the calendar system. We only left that voicemail because he insisted you'd find the key. He trusted your sense of later. I didn't earn this kind of faith, I said. The confession surprised me. You loved him, Daniel said simply. That seemed to be enough for him. I folded the page as if it were fragile. What do we do next? We enforce the will, he said. And we do it without noise. They think speed is safety. The house had new rules now, heard or not heard. That didn't stop the old game from playing a few more moves. Within days of the funeral, 3 cash withdrawals, each just under the branch ID threshold. A hardware store receipt for a deadbolt with a SKU that matched the one gleaming on my front door. A locksmith's invoice with the date and time stamped plainly. A new joint account opened in my husband's surname, hers and a friend, labeled household. A locked cabinet of papers that somehow now required her permission. Pressure doesn't always shout. Sometimes it dresses inefficiency. When the notice for the will reading went out, my name came last, as if alphabetical order were a moral verdict. I showed up anyway, 15 minutes early, wearing the navy dress that never wrinkled. Mr. Alvarez insisted on waiting downstairs with a newspaper and a thermos of coffee just in case. I hugged him, an act that almost made me cry, and rode the elevator up, alone. The conference room smelled like lemon, oil on wood and the faint metallic tang of a printer that had worked hard. My daughter-in-law came in with her chin level, and her eyes set into something that looked like resolve and sounded like opportunity. 2 other relatives followed, faces I'd smiled at across Thanksgiving turkey, and endured across committee fights about whether the grandchildren's stockings should be fair. Daniel read. He did not perform the words. He let them stand on their own legs. When he read the life estate, my daughter-in-law's pen tapped once against her legal pad. When he read the 90-day kindness clause, the pen stopped. When he read the alternate plan, she sat back as if a chair had shifted under her. That's not what he would have wanted, she said in a voice that attempted to be both calm and wounded. It is exactly what he wanted, Daniel said. He did not add, because he wrote it down. You can't expect us to support. She cut herself off, too late for the kindness of silence. No one is asking you to support me, I said, keeping my voice level. The will asks you not to harm me for 90 days. That's all. She looked at me as if I had cheated on a test she'd designed. I will fight this, she said. You're not taking what belongs to my family. Daniel folded his hands. The will is your father-in-law's statement of what belongs to whom, he said. And it includes consequences for a breach. Her eyes flashed. If grief is salt water, resentment is sand. It gets everywhere and grinds until you bleed. The binder. I took Daniel's advice and went, not to a skyscraper law firm, but to a brick building around the corner from a bus stop where people held plastic grocery bags like flags of ordinary survival. A clinic with a hand-painted sign that said, legal help, walk-ins welcome. There, a woman named Kendra listened to me without checking a clock. Write dates, she said, sliding a blank sheet across the table. List the funeral, the lock change, the first message telling you not to enter. Save texts. Take screenshots that show the number and the time. Keep voicemails. Ask your neighbor for a statement in plain words, not legalese. If there's a locksmith receipt, get a copy. Photograph the lock. Bring me anything the bank gave you, including the codicil copy and your husband's note. We'll make a packet. A packet, I repeated. Paper with bones, she said, smiling with one side of her mouth. Judges like bones. I went home to Mr. Alvarez's couch with homework. Grief makes some tasks feel like lifting a car. The list felt like lifting a kettle. Possible. I printed texts where she wrote, "It's better if you don't come back tonight." I screenshotted the thread where I asked, "When can I pick up my things?" And she wrote, "They're outside. Don't knock." Mr. Alvarez wrote a statement in the careful cursive of a man who had learned to sign his name on time cards. He wrote that he saw me at 9:50 p.m., with a suitcase by the garage, that the porch light was on, that I slept on his couch until morning. He printed the date and signed with a flourish that surprised me. "Been a while since I used this for anything but checks," he said. We added the locksmith invoice, the hardware receipt, the bank's ledger notes. We photographed the new lock, the one that gleamed like a threat. Kendra made a binder with tabs. Her labels were crisp and unflinching. Timeline, texts, witness, receipts, will and codicil, bank, photos. "Bring this to everything," she said. "Even if you're only picking up coffee." "I don't want a war," I said. "This isn't a war," she said. "It's a weather report, the first hearing." The courtroom had the peculiar brightness of rooms, where the fluorescent lights are determined to be honest, pews, flags, the hush of anxiety wearing its Sunday best. The judge looked like a man who had learned how to be patient without surrendering to it. Her attorney spoke first, voice polished to a courtroom sheen. He called me a guest who had overstayed and complicated a delicate financial situation. The house, he said, needed order. I was confused, unwell with grief, and unwilling to cooperate. Kendra stood and let air return to the room. "Your Honor," she said, "we ask to maintain the status quo and enforce the codicil. We have a life estate provision, a 90-day kindness clause, and evidence that the lock was changed within a week of the funeral. The petitioner has a place to live by law. She also has a binder." A small laugh flickered and died. The judge lifted a hand to keep the room from finding its humor. Kendra handed him the binder with the care you give to a newborn. He flipped to the texts. He paused at the locksmith invoice. He read Mr. Alvarez's statement twice. He glanced at me once, and then away, as if refusing to make my grief into a spectacle. "We will keep the status quo," he said. "No lock changes. No late-night messages. No interference. The will be respected pending final determination." On our way out, the corridor felt bigger than on the way in. I exhaled a breath I had been holding since the porch light. Her look followed me down the hall, a storm that had been told to wait offshore. When stories crack. Her entire defense rested on a single idea. That I left by choice. That I had decided to take some space and then weaponize that absence. That the house had been safe for me, and I had chosen drama. The timestamps did not agree. The eviction text, 9:47 p.m. The locksmith invoice. Complete at 7:32 p.m. the next day. Mr. Alvarez's couch, 10:30 p.m. A throw pillow under my head, and a glass of water sweating onto a coaster. Then came the doorbell camera from the neighbor across the hedge. He showed up at Kendra's office with a thumb drive and the apology people offer when they think they're delivering pain. "I didn't know what to do with this," he said, "but when I heard about court," the clip was 15 seconds long and mercilessly clear. It showed my suitcase on the porch. It showed me trying my key twice. It showed my daughter-in-law in the doorway, arms folded, saying the words that make perfect actors of anyone. "You cannot enter." The judge watched it once, and then watched it again in slow motion. He did not look at me. He looked at the lock. "Why would you tell the court she left willingly?" he asked her attorney, who did not answer the question so much as try to wrestle it into a different shape. "Emotions are high," he said. "Memories under stress." The judge held up a hand. "We have metal and time," he said. "Memories can sit down." The smart lock log, which we subpoenaed from the app provider, listed a note from the day of the change. deactivate old key. In the column that sometimes stayed blank, someone had typed, new start. Kendra slid that page across the table like a final card. No flourish, just the truth placed where it belonged. Why he hid it. The night before the final hearing, I sat on Mr. Alvarez's couch and held the envelope with my initials. I ran my thumb over the crease as if smoothing it could smooth time. I thought about my husband's careful plan, his quiet breadcrumbs, the way he had hidden this not from people but for me. He had not been a secretive man. He hated gossip and loved lists. He believed in making plans that did not ask too much of people on their worst days. He knew his family could be kind and then exacting, like a hand on your shoulder that becomes a push. He had watched holidays turn into small tribunals over casseroles and checks. He had once told me, while fixing a hinge with a grin, people are who they are when the music stops. Maybe he wrote the clause to see who would hold the door open when there were no more casseroles. Maybe he knew how speed could be marketed as mercy. Maybe he believed compassion needed teeth to stand up in this family. I remembered the day at the kitchen sink when he promised, simple as a towel hung in its place, that I would always be safe with him. I realized this was what it looked like for him to keep that promise, after he could no longer stand in the doorway himself. I tucked the envelope back into the folder and put the folder in my bag. I set my alarm. I slept. The room where paper speaks. The courtroom felt colder the second time, as if stories shed heat when they give up their lies. Her attorney tried a new angle, that the kindness clause was aspirational, that no one meant harm, that administrative order had required the lock change. He said those words in that thin way people use when their argument has bones you can count and none of them are strong. Kendra didn't so much argue as point. The clause is not aspirational, she said. It's a condition with a consequence written by the testator, witnessed, and notarized. It has a 90-day time frame that was breached within 7 days. The life estate is clear. The penalty is clear. The question is not what we wish. It is what is written. The judge turned to my daughter-in-law and asked what I had come to recognize as his favorite question. The kind that does not ask for a story, only for gravity. Did you change the lock? He asked. She inhaled, as if oxygen might develop a theory she could stand on. I authorized it, she said at last. The house needed order. We were drowning in... She stopped herself. I thought it would be faster, if she left. I felt the room tilt, and then right itself, as if the truth were a weight at the end of a plumb line showing us where down actually was. Faster is not kinder, the judge said. Faster is only faster. He looked down at the codicil, then at the binder, then at us. My ruling, he said, is straightforward. He upheld the life estate. I had the right to reside in my home for the remainder of my life, responsible for ordinary maintenance and utilities, protected against interference. He found that the 90-day kindness clause had been breached. He enforced the consequence. After my life estate ends, the property proceeds will fund the scholarship my husband named, not the heirs who changed the lock. He affirmed the grandchildren's trust. He warned the parties against further interference under pain of sanctions. Then he did something I could not have planned for. He looked directly at my daughter-in-law, not unkindly, and said, "Grief is not a license to abandon character. The will asked for gentleness when no one was watching. In this courtroom, everyone is." He closed the file. The noise in the room rose and fell like a tide. Kendra squeezed my hand. I did not cry. Outside, Mr. Alvarez folded his newspaper with the dignity of a friend who has watched the weather and tells you what the sky is doing without making it about himself. "Well?" he asked. "We get to go home," I said. He nodded like a man who had just been told the season had changed on schedule. The first night back. The lock turned with a soft click, the sound of a throat clearing before a necessary sentence. I stepped in and stood still to let the air remember me, lemon oil and dust and the faint sweetness of old books. Afternoon light slid across the hardwood in stripes. I set his photo on the windowsill and wiped a small circle of fog off the glass with my sleeve. The street looked the same as it always had. Mailbox, maple, the corner where he used to wait to walk me in after late shifts. The quiet felt like a blanket folded for me, not the suffocating kind that had smothered me on the porch. I filled the kettle. The burner ticked into a steady blue. I set out a chipped mug and the tea bag he always teased me for reusing twice. The whistle rose. The steam curled. I wrapped both hands around the cup and let the heat give my fingers their names back. The house exhaled, and so did I. Boundaries and the kindness that isn't weak. I changed the locks, not in spite, not in triumph, but in care. I added a chain, a door camera angled toward the steps, a motion light set to stay on during the hours people think they're invisible. I did not post about it. I did not ask for allies on the internet. Kendra told me to keep communications brief, in writing, and to use one sentence more than my point required. Please email me. It became a spell. I did not meet at night. I did not debate in hallways. I carried a copy of the court order in my bag like a passport. Forgiveness did not arrive as a trumpeting parade. It walked in on quiet feet. It did not ask me to unlearn what I had learned. It asked me to hold what I knew without letting it harden me into someone my husband wouldn't recognize. I left a door open for change. Not the front door, never again without terms, but the door people build when they decide to behave differently than last time. It swung on 3 hinges: respect, sincerity, and time. With the grandchildren, I was careful and consistent. I showed up for school plays and soccer games and sat in the second row, applauding with my whole hands. I kept extra snacks in the cupboard they could reach themselves. When they asked why I didn't come around for a while, I told them, grown-ups made mistakes. Grown-ups are fixing them, and I meant it. I would not make them carry weight that was not their size. Sometimes, on Sundays, I lit a candle near the photo and told him about the day as if he were on the porch, 1 foot on the bottom step, nodding. I said the words that did not get a courtroom or a binder. I miss you. I am okay. I am angry sometimes, but it doesn't run the house. The tea is too strong. Your hat is still ridiculous. The fund that turns bricks into books. The scholarship fund existed first as a sentence, then as a file, then as a small room where a woman with sharp kindness and excellent folders collected names. When the paperwork finished being paperwork and became a thing, I visited. A plaque on the wall bore his name and a line that made my throat tighten, for students who need a door held open. The first cohort came through in jeans and hope. A girl with ink-stained fingers, a boy with the cautious eyes of someone who has learned to apologize for wanting something, a veteran who sat with his back to the wall and smiled like a winter sun, small, real, earned. I gave a speech I kept short. My husband believed kindness should have a plan, I said. He built one. Please use the door he held open. Walk through. Hold it for the next person. Afterward, a student approached with a textbook in his hands like a fragile animal. Thank you, he said. I didn't think people like me. You are exactly the kind of person this was for, I said. He nodded with the full body relief of a person who has been told they belong by someone who has the right to say it. On my way home, I stood at the bus stop even though I had a car, letting the ordinary weather of people remind me that life is not a courtroom but something it touches. A woman with a grocery bag full of oranges smiled at me. I smiled back. The visit. Months later, on a Tuesday that smelled like rain, my daughter-in-law stood on my porch. She rang the bell once and then stepped back, hands plain at her sides, as if understanding at last that the door had rules. I did not open it for a long moment. Not to punish, to breathe. When I did not unchain. I stood on my side, she on hers, the space between us the honest size of what had happened. I came to apologize, she said. The air had changed since the courtroom. Her hair was pulled back. Her eyes did not glitter with the brittle light of someone rehearsing a victory. She looked like a person whose story had fallen through, and who had decided to tell the truth because she had run out of other materials. I thought if you left quickly, we could finish quickly, she said. We were drowning in bills and his name on everything and the noise and the casseroles and the calls. I made it about quiet. I called it efficiency. It was cruelty dressed as order. My jaw softened even as the part of my body that remembered the porch light refused to forget. You hurt me, I said. It sounded like a small sentence in the world and a cathedral in my chest. I know, she whispered. I know now. We stood with rain beginning to stipple the steps between us. "I am willing to forgive," I said. "But the door stays different now." She nodded. "I don't want your door. Only maybe your number. Sometimes the kids, they can call me anytime," I said. "You can email me. The old sentence, made new by time. We will go slowly." She exhaled with the relief of a person whose bargain had been fear and who discovered that truth costs less. When she walked away, I closed the door and leaned my forehead against it. Not in sadness, in the gratitude you feel when a storm ends without pretending it never happened. Good paper. We kept the house in good repair. I replaced shingles in a storm season that seemed determined to audition for metaphor. The grandchildren helped clean gutters, which they hated in theory and loved in practice, because I paid in homemade cookies, and the quiet pride you give to a child who can do something not everyone can do, Daniel, and Kendra became names we said in the house like saints. When envelopes came with words like notice, I did not flinch. I scanned and emailed them. When bills came for things the remainder men were obligated to cover. Taxes. A cracked beam. A clerk at the funded scholarship office helped coordinate with a trustee with the patience of a chess player. I learned the difference between ordinary maintenance and capital repairs. I learned to keep receipts in a folder labeled with a name I never thought I would choose for a folder. Evidence. I learned that good paper is not an enemy. It is a railing on a staircase in the dark. Sometimes I still woke at 3 a.m. to the ghost of panic. The lock that wouldn't turn. The porch light. The voice that was polite and merciless. I kept the tiny brass key on a ribbon near the lamp. I would pick it up in the night and feel the ridges with my thumb until my heart remembered that a plan can be a pillow. The day grief turned its face. Grief did not leave. It changed clothes. It stopped arriving like a thief and started sitting in a chair by the window like an old friend who didn't talk much. I watered the plants and didn't kill as many as I used to. I made the bed more days than not. I found a blue thread in the hem of a curtain and, ridiculously, felt happy. I took the grandchildren to the library on Wednesdays. We built a routine, books, muffins, the park bench under the good tree. They told me jokes that made no sense and laughed as if nonsense were currency. They were right. It is. On the anniversary, I walked to the courthouse steps and stood in the place where sunlight had landed on my face after the ruling, not because I needed the building, because I wanted to thank the air for having held that day. I whispered, "Thank you for paper and for people who know what to do with it." On the way home, I bought a vase I didn't need because it was the color of joy when it is humble. The letter I never sent. Sometimes I wrote letters to my husband in a notebook with a red spine. I never mailed them and I didn't want to. They weren't for him. They were for the part of me that needed to unsnarl sentences in ink so they would not tangle in my throat. One night I wrote, "You were right to trust later. You were right about character walking around when the music stops. I have learned the shape of my spine. It's quieter than I thought. It's also heavier. Thank you for the brass breadcrumb. Thank you for putting compassion in writing. Thank you for loving me in a way that survived you." Then I made tea and left the notebook on the counter because not everything needs to be put away. The kindness clause. Living. The kindness clause became a story we told in this town. Not the scandal version, but the lesson. The legal clinic hung a flyer that said, "Plan the love you intend." The Bar Association put on a seminar called Compassion in Plain Language, Life Estates, Codicils, and Conditional Gifts. People used fewer metaphors and more dates. They wrote their wishes down in clear sentences that did not ask lawyers to guess. I went once and sat in the back. I watched couples hold hands while they learned about revocable trusts and powers of attorney and beneficiary designations that didn't forget second marriages. I watched a woman in a yellow sweater write 90 days and underline it twice, then turn to her partner with wet eyes and say, "I want this for you if I go first." He nodded with the weight of a vow. When the seminar ended, a young man held the door open for me and said, "After you." I thanked him and thought of how sometimes kindness is big enough to rewrite a will, and sometimes it is exactly the size of a door, held open in a hallway that smells like burnt coffee, the last thing I needed to know. Near winter, Daniel invited me to the office for something that needed a signature. He poured water like always, and then hesitated, an almost smile playing at the corner of his mouth, as if it had asked permission first. "Your husband," he said, "left one more note with me. Not a legal document, just something he wanted you to have after things felt steady again." He placed a small envelope on the table, my name in the familiar angle. I waited longer than I needed to, because the ceremony felt like part of the kindness. Inside, a photo. The two of us on the back steps many years ago. I had my hand in his hair. He had a smear of paint on his cheek, the same blue we used for the porch. On the back, 5 words in his hand. "See?" The color held up. I laughed out loud. Daniel smiled fully. I felt the day lift, the way curtains lift when a breeze decides a room has earned its airing. Sometimes at dusk, I sit on the porch with the brass key on a ribbon around my neck and watch the neighborhood do its living. The Alvarez grandchildren race scooters. Someone's dog walks someone who thinks they're walking a dog. A boy practices violin with the passion of a future that doesn't know how to count yet. I turn the porch light on when the street begins to turn to ink. The switch clicks the way a gavel does when the right thing has been said out loud. Across the street, Mr. Alvarez raises his mug. I raise mine. We do not need the whole story anymore. We have the weather and the evening. Inside, the kettle ticks on and off as if speaking in the old language of comfort. I open the window so the house can learn my breath and I can learn its. The key presses cool against my collarbone. I touch it once. This is not a trophy. It is a reminder of a promise kept in paper and in time, of grief that did not get to be the architect of my life, of love that wrote something down so it would not be misremembered. The night after the funeral, the door did not open. Now it does. I am home.